All right. Anyone want to share a light bulb moment from yesterday? Anyone want to share a moment that they got into their capstone that they're proud of? Anyone want to share where they're at?
I think my light bulb moment was when you was doing the unordered list on the comic section for the second comment and how you implemented those things. Like that was one of the most key important things I needed for my capstone. So that was helpful. And implementing it is, but knowing yesterday.
You broke up there a little bit at the end.
Yeah,
But glad that I was helpful for your capstone. Um, that's the whole goal of the blog project, right? We want to create examples for you to be able to say, hey, we've already done this once. Where do we go from here? How do I take this and implement it on my own? Because we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here, right? We get overwhelmed by having like 40 different windows open and having to switch around all these different places. But it is kind of crazy to think that once you get these concepts down, you can really build just about anything, right? And that is anything from a web application where we can sign in and post comments, all the way to making a app for a smart home speaker, right? So that you can talk to that and go back and forth. That just an API. And it's kind of crazy to think about like, oh, when I check out at a coffee shop and they're using an iPad, I could go build that, right? I could go build a little app that's got the items and you click on an item and it adds it to a list. And we think a list in a database and saving that. And then, oh, when they hit the checkout button, I need to get the total of that list and make that happen, right? So you get to the point where all of these concepts, yes, there are a lot of them, but when you think about the range of what you can build with all of those concepts, it's kind of empowering to know that you can build just about anything with that. Danny, you mentioned getting the images in. Yes, two different ways of doing that. Unfortunately, no easy way of doing it for the form submission. I really tried my hardest to simplify that down as much as I could, and it's still a shit show. But at least you have an example of a shit show now so that you can replicate that shit show if you need it. But we also touched a little bit on how we can store an image path in the database. And then as long as that image file is created already, we can use that information to make the image show up. So two different ways of doing it. In hindsight, I probably should have showed you the image pathway first and then the file upload second, but you've got both options now, so you can go either way. Anything else from yesterday? Do we have any capstone questions that we want to see before we get into our project for the night? Or any concept questions, any terminology questions, any I'm trying to do this and I can't get it done in my capstone questions, any questions about requirements for the check-in coming up on Thursday? Anything that you woke up in the middle of the night screaming bloody murder because I've invaded your dreams, but then you remembered what you
Um,
wanted to ask?
Max, I have a question. I'm currently not on my computer right now, so I can't pull my capstone up. But like, how would I do um, like if I have, I have this search bar for people to search um, like what specialty they would want in therapy. Is like, how would I do um a way for them to know like some of the specialties, if that makes sense, like check boxes or a drop down or something like that.
Yeah, good question. So because I've seen your database, that's actually a tricky question to answer because right now in your database, they're all stored in one long text string, right? And so being able to break those out and figure out how to search. So would you want it to work? Let's say that one specialty is, I don't know, trauma and PTSD. I don't know what list of specialties, but let's just pick those two. When a user picks PTSD and trauma, would you want it to only show counselors that have one or the other, or would you only want it to show counselors that have both listed as a specialty?
Oh, that's a good question. I think maybe one or the other.
Okay. So let me think about that. Are you going to be by your computer anytime soon?
Yes.
Raise your hand when you get onto your computer and you can share your screen, and we will go through that example, because I think it will be good for everyone to get a little bit more exposure of how we make a search query work, and then kind of breaking that down into queries.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? And even if you think it's a more of a one-on-one question, if it is a question that has the potential of helping other students, more examples are often better. Going once. Going twice. All right. If any pop up, feel free to throw them in the chat or Slack me. Tonight, we are going to get a little bit more practice with Clerk. And so I am going to start the night off with a little Giphy. Oftentimes, when we are looking at other people's code, our first reaction is something like this. That is a very common thing to happen when you are working in a team, right? Because you open up someone else's code and you're like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? I will never understand this, right? Well, you break it down into little pieces. So Ryan and I went back and forth. We picked Clerk, made sure that not only he was comfortable teaching it, but that I was also comfortable kind of being able to help you guys through it, right? So what I did is I started with his code. And so I'm going to start in the front end, because I always like to start from the user experience, right? And the first thing that I noticed right off the bat is there is a very long list of imports here. And while that may seem intimidating to get started, what it's actually telling me is that this Clerk React package is actually doing a lot of heavy lifting for us. It's giving us a sign-in component. It's giving us this redirect functionality. It's giving us this thing called Clerk Provider, which I'm guessing is going to give us access to data, provide data at multiple different levels. So I'm like, okay, let's break this down a little bit. Now, it may be tempting to start at this protected sign-in, but I want to start at a place that I am comfortable with, that I'm familiar with. And to me, what's the highest level of our React app? Well, that's got to control what page is showing up. That is our router that is in control of that, right? So I go down here and I go, all right, where is my router? My router is hanging out in my app. I know where my app is in a normal React spot. I've got the routes I've already created. And then I see, okay, there are Clerk-specific routes here, right? So what are we doing here? Well, we make a sign-in path and a sign-up path. And then what element do we associate with that? Sign in and sign up. Okay, now I need to know, where are those coming from? So if I command click on it, you'll see it jumps me back up to my imports up here at the top. That's good. That means I don't have to create those from scratch. I don't need to do my username and my password field and the forgot password and how do we do the form submission? How do we save that to the database? Clerk is taking care of all of that for me. So I'm like, okay, cool. I understand these are passed in through Clerk. And these are pages I've already created. So what else is going on here? This element called protected. So I don't know if this is coming from Clerk or if this is something that we made on our own. So I'm going to command click on protected, and it's going to jump me up to this other component. And I'm like, okay, what's going on here? Well, if you're signed in, show this protected signed in. What does that mean? Well, I command click on my signed in, that's coming from Clerk as well. So I'm like, all right, that's taking care of that. And signed out, okay, these are two separate cases. If we are signed out, then redirect to the sign-in page. Like, okay, kind of understand that. Otherwise, take me to the protected signed in. Well, what does that look like? That is this component up here. Now I'm like, all right, a lot going on here. This use user and use auth are both coming from Clerk. So I'm like, okay, I understand that. We will figure out the set state later. And then what's going on here? We're saying, hey, when this get token changes, use this function called get token, get access to the token. Then when we do our fetch request, okay, fetch, that's familiar territory. Go ahead and go to the secret word endpoint. All right, that's in our backend. We're going to have to set that up eventually, but also pass in this token that Clerk has generated for us. Like, okay, understand that. And then when the data comes back, set that into state and then do whatever we need to with it. So I kind of break this down into 3 steps. One, I've got to update all of my front end components to handle all of the sign in, the sign out, and the redirects. 2, I need to update any of my API calls to include this token information so that I know what user is signed in and signed out. And then 3, I have to go to my backend and set up my backend to figure out what API routes, what API endpoints should only be accessible by signed in users. So we kind of covered 1 already, which is the whole import sign in, all of that stuff. Number 2 is all of the fetching that needs to happen here. And then what's the third thing we need to do? Well, I'm going to go to my backend. Shakota, I'll come to you in 1 second. In my server.js, I'm seeing 2 new packages here. 1 new package here. 1 new package here. My JSON web token, or my JWT. The JWT is a secure algorithm-y kind of thing that basically allows us to decode signed in users. So what we do is we have this new middleware. Does anyone want to take a stab at what a middleware is? No one?
Is that similar to what we went over with for yesterday with the Malter, or no?
It is very, very good. Malter is a middleware. So there are 2 types of middleware. We have global middleware, which is what we use right here with both cores and JSON. It's basically saying, hey, when a API request comes in to secret word, before you get into the rec res and everything we're going to do in here, instead, go in and make sure that cores has everything it needs to know so that when we send a response to the front end, it can get access to our cross-origin request. And also, before you go run your rec res and all of that good stuff, go parse out any JSON that's getting sent in if the content headers is set. What Ryan did here is he made his own middleware. Middleware is just a function. So it gets a rec and a res just like always, But what's interesting about middleware is that it has to call the next thing that it is supposed to run. That is helpful because sometimes we don't want it to run the next thing. Sometimes we want to say, nope, you're not signed in. You're not allowed to go create something new in the database or go get access to that data. You are blocked from here. I'm going to res.send something back and I'm done with you. But if the user is authenticated, which happens to be the case all the way down here, what we are going to do is call the next function. So that brings us to the second type of middleware. We could say, hey, we are going to make this a global middleware. But what that would mean is that the user would have to be signed in for every single endpoint that we were trying to access. We don't always want to do that. Sometimes we want to have endpoints like the contact us form that can get submitted without a user being signed in. So what Ryan did is he made this whole middleware and then he applied it to this secret word endpoint, where basically we say, first of all, go validate that middleware. Go take care of whether the user or not is signed in. And if they are, go call the next layer of this function, this endpoint. Well, the next function is to go in and res.send something back and get access to the clerk user ID from the auth. So we are going to practice our 3 steps. We're going to get our front end routes set up for all of the authentication. Then we are going to get our back end. Then we are going to get our front end set up to pass in all of that authentication info. And then after we do that, we are going to set up our back end to be able to get access to what user is signed in. From there, we can add in some additional functionality like, hey, only admin users should be able to create a new post, or hey, only signed in users should be able to post a comment. Sound good? Shaquota, I'm going to come back to your example probably right after the break, if that is okay with you. Let's see how far we can get in authentication. Did I shake loose any questions that you guys may have about Clerk so far? Okay, so what I am going to do is I'm going to start with the Clerk homepage. So I'm going to sign in. I'm going to use my GitHub. I'm going to go take an hour to go authenticate into my GitHub because I've got about 19 layers of authentication set up. Tonight is going to be just like yesterday. If you want to follow along, you totally can. If you want to try this in your own capstone, instead of doing it in the blog project, that is not a terrible idea either. Or if you want to just go along for the ride, that is totally fine. Okay. I am going to delete this project and start over from scratch so that you guys can see all the steps. I'm going to add a new application. I'm going to call this blog. Totally fine for a user to sign in with their email or Facebook. If I wanted to set up more, I definitely could, but we'll just start with that for now. So I'm going to hit create application. That is going to give me 2 pieces of information, and I'm going to do this in React, and that is going to give me my publishable key. So I'm just going to keep that around in the back of my mind. I also am going to take my reference code, all of the stuff that you did with Ryan to get it to work in the portfolio. I'm going to reference that as I'm going. So I'm juggling even more windows than I am used to here. The reason why I want to show you this is that you almost never really start from scratch. You may have a client who comes in with a new project idea, but you always have other projects that you've done in the past that you can reference. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with going, I've already done this before. I know how to get it working over here. And because of that, I can apply that somewhere else. So I'm going to put that off to the side. I am going to head to my week 20. I'm going to go to my day 1, my back end. I'm going to delete my node modules, my front end, delete my node modules, duplicate my day 1 as my day 2. Pop open my front end and throw that over there. Pop open my back end, throw this over here. I'm going to open an integrated terminal. I'm going to npm install. Remember, the only reason we have to run npm install is because we deleted our node modules to make the copy faster. So every time you start your project, you do not need to run npm install. We only do that because we make copies of our code over and over again to have separate days. In my backend, I'm going to npm start and make sure that I've got my connected to database. In my front end, I am also going to npm start and get my blog going on here. And then I am going to share live share links with all of you. Remember when this setup seemed impossible to do? How much you have all grown and gotten used to this? Give you guys a couple minutes to connect to the live share if you would like. I will also do a live share on Ryan's code from last week. In case you find it easier to see it from the live share. I am also going to start in my app.js. Ryan's code is on GitHub. It is in week 19, day 3 on GitHub, Palash. I would not be attempting this without his code to reference. Everyone good? Anyone need another minute? Reminder, you don't have to follow along. If you do want to follow along, consider doing it in your own capstone instead of doing it in the blog project. Or if you were really staying up on the blog project and are using that as a reference for everything else, you are more than welcome to follow along with me there. Okay, Plush.
Should we do a breakout room, or like just do you want us to like do it on the side while looking at what we were doing here? If we want to do it in our capstone.
Oh, I would just recommend, following along and just whatever I'm adding into the blog, just do that, but add it into your capstone.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, so first thing, I've got this very long list of all of these imports up here. I'm actually going to use all of these imports as kind of a making sure that I finish all of the steps on the front end. But the very first thing is that I have this @clerk React. Well, I need to be able to install that. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to go to my front end. I'm going to go down to my terminal. I've got a Control-C to stop my front end because I can't install things while React is running. Then I am going to npm install my clerk-react. And I will put that command in the chat. That should have been a lowercase I if you're going to copy and paste it from the chat. Hate Zoom autocorrect. Okay, now that I've got that installed, I'm going to head to my SRC. I'm going to head to my app.js where I've got all of my routes going on. And I am going to take this very long list of all of these imports and throw them into my front end. Then I'm going to pay attention to all of these being light blue, because as soon as they turn dark blue, I know I've gotten all of them, and that's going to make sure that I don't miss any of these setup steps. From there, I'm going to go to my highest level of the application, which is down here in my app, and there's this clerk provider going on. That's what I need to get set up first. So, and it happens to be the first on our list, which is convenient. So I'm going to go down to my app, and I am going to put everything in my clerk provider. And that needs to wrap everything that is inside my application. Then my clerk provider needs two things. One is this navigate to function. This is basically telling clerk, hey, how do I get access? How do I move things around? How do I change different routes? I do that with my router navigate to. I also need to make sure that my router happens to be called my routes. So I need to use that down here so that the clerk provider knows how to navigate things around. And then the other thing I need is my publishable key. Now, Ryan probably had you set this up in a .env file, which can add in a little bit of security. But because we can publish this key, in other words, because this key can go to the front end, I'm going to cheat a little bit and do it a little easier. I do need to add in my prop, so I'm going to add in my publishable key. I'm going to go back to clerk, copy just the section of the key that I need, head back over to my React code, and drop that key right into the prop. We'll pause there for a minute. We npm installed. We added the long list of imports that we had in Ryan's code over into our front end. We added our clerk provider down around our app. And then we added in our navigate to, made sure the my routes lines up with whatever our router is called right here. And then we added in the publishable key from our clerk.com dashboard. All set up. We haven't really done anything with authentication yet. We're just getting ourselves in a good spot. To make sure that we didn't break anything, good idea to npm start back in our front end and make sure that our front end loads without any problems, which it did. Give me a thumbs up in Zoom if you are following along, just so I've got an idea of how many people are following. Okay. Just want to make sure I give you guys enough time. And if you are not following along, I recommend you write down steps that we're going through so that you've got a chance to try it in your own capstone. Authentication is not a requirement for graduation. However, knowing how to set up authentication in an app is a very widely used skill. So good idea to be comfortable with some way of getting authentication set up, even if you aren't planning on using it in your capstone. Okay, everyone good? Anyone need another minute? Cool. Okay, so next up, I'm going to go back up to my list, and I've got my signed in and my signed out. So that's what I want to figure out. Where did Ryan use those next? These are in my clerk specific routes. So I'm going to copy those figure out, first of all, where is he using them? He's using them up in our router. That's where we want to put it. So I'm going to come down and I'm going to throw both of those in my sign in and my sign up. I'm going to go ahead and save that. And I don't want to go too many steps without being able to test, right? I kind of want to know, hey, is my sign in working? Well, how do I get to my sign in? Well, the same way that I would get to my new post, I could go to a URL that said new post. Well, I can, in my front end, just type in /sign in, but I wouldn't expect a user to do that, right? We need to add some link so they can sign in. So I'm going to go to my homepage. I'm going to go down to my action links down at the bottom where I've got my new post. And right here, I'm going to throw in a new link that says sign in. And it takes me to the sign in route that we just set up right here. So I save, I go back over, I click sign in, and now I get to this lovely sign in page. So added 2 routes, the sign in and the sign up. Then in my home page, I added in my sign in link, and then I went and I tested it. So I hit my sign in. I'm going to cheat and sign in with Google. Okay. Takes me back to my home page, and I'm like, I guess I'm signed in. I don't really know, right? Well, let's figure that out. I am going to say, I actually don't like the flow of that. And I'm not sure if Ryan did this. Redirect to sign in, user button, user auth. I'm going to see if there is in the clerk documentation for React. I want to see if we can redirect to a different page. So this is all of the protecting of a page. We'll get to that in a second. Here's the routing library. The sign in path. Read session, use user, customize. Pre-built theme, making a theme. Using Tailwind, CSS modules. What's going on here? Redirect to sign in, redirect to user profile. Redirect URL, authenticate with redirect. Let me see if I can do this easier. Clerk React control where sign in redirects. Redirect to sign in, redirect to sign up. Okay, I've got a different idea of how to do this. Okay. Slightly different approach. Let's see if this works. I'm thinking about this and I'm like, all right, I don't actually want to take them to a sign-in page. I want to take them to the new post page. And if they are signed in, then they're allowed to stay on that new post page. However, if they are not signed in and they go to new post, we should take them to the sign-in page instead. I think that might be the better approach. So in order to do that, we need some notion of a protected page to basically say if you are signed in, then you are allowed to see whatever the page content is. But if you are not signed in, redirect you to that sign-in page. So I am going to I'm going to figure out where do we use this function protected? We use that right here. So what I'm going to do is say on my new post page, I am going to import signed in. And I'm also going to import my signed out from my clerk React. Then I'm going to go down to my return, and down here in this return, I'm going to say, hey, if you are signed out, then redirect to the sign in page. Then in my home page, instead of linking you to the sign in, I'm just going to go right to this new post page. So let's see if that works, because I really don't know if it's going to. I go back to my React. I'm on my home page. I click on new post, and I got to my new post page. And I'm like, wait a second. I'm signed in now, aren't I? I've got no way of knowing whether I'm signed in or not. Maybe I should be able to show on the home page if I am signed in, then show the new post link. But if I am signed out, let me think about that. If I am signed in, I want a signed out button so that I can sign out of the system, because right now I've got no way to sign out. So I'm going to add that. I'm going to look up here, and there's this function called use user. So I'm going to use that in my home page. I'm going to say const user equals my use user. And if I have a user signed in, give them a link to sign out. Use user is not defined. I need to pull that in from my clerk React. Save, come over here. I refresh. Now I've got a sign out link. And if I click on sign out, that does not work. Sign in, signed out. How do I sign out? Did Ryan cover how to sign out in class? Oh, good. I'm glad I'm in new territory. All right, let's see if we can find it in the documentation. Clerk, sign in, sign up. User profile. User button. Oh, great. Clerk doesn't even have a user button. Okay. Loaded, redirect.
I'll sign on mine's Max. There is a I do have a user button that you need to click to sign out.
Okay. Oh, there is also a sign out button that we can use as well. So I'm going to try that approach. Import in our homepage, the sign out button. Then instead of showing a link to sign out, show the sign out button. Okay, go back here. Okay, we got a very ugly button. We can fix that later. But now if I click the sign out button, it goes away. I'm like, okay, I think I signed out. Now I hit new post and it takes me to my login screen. Okay, that's pretty cool. But if I'm not signed in, you'll notice when I hit that new post, it shows the page for a second and then will redirect me to that sign-in page. And I'm like, well, I only want that new post to show if they are signed in. So in order to fix that in our new post, I'm going to wrap this whole thing in a function that says signed in. That way, they will only see this form if they are signed in. Otherwise, they'll get redirected to the sign-in page. So come back over here. I click on my new post. It takes me to my sign-in. I hit continue with Google. That signs me into my blog. And now I am able to make my new post. And back on my home page, I can see my sign out button right here. Okay, let me go through those steps just in case anyone is following along. In our homepage, we added in an import for our sign out button, and we also added in our use user. This gives us access to the user information of who is signed in. What we also did is we came down here and we said, hey, if there is a user signed in, give them this sign out button. Then we added into our new post up at the top imports for redirect to sign in, signed in, and signed out. And from there, we were able to say, if the user is signed out, just take them to the sign in page. When they sign in, it's going to come back to this page and then they can make a post. But if they are signed in, show them the new post page and all of the information related to that. I'm going to pause there just for a second in case anyone is trying to make this work in their capstone. If it is working, at this point, you should be able to click on the new post button and either have it show the post, or if we are signed out and click on the new post button, it takes you to the sign-in screen. The sign-in screen actually will work and take you back to your new post. If you are doing this in your capstone, obviously you won't have a post page, but this should be something along the lines of an admin page, right? Something that only an admin should be able to see, whether it's contact form submissions, whether it's some way to edit information in your database or add a new row, whether it's, I don't know, something along those lines. Sign-in is not a requirement for the capstone in general, so you don't have to have it working by this Thursday, but bonus points if you do. Anyone need another minute? One good? Okay. So, feeling pretty good. In less than an hour, we got a whole sign-in system working on our front end. But we've got a little bit of a problem. Does anyone know why we need to authenticate on the back end? Did Ryan cover that at all? Okay, here's why we need authentication, not only on the front end, but also on the back end. I'm going to go back to my home page and I'm going to sign out. Now we know if I click on new post, it's going to redirect me to the sign in page and we've got all of that secured, right? Well, we run into an issue, Corwin. It's a little bit more than just grabbing user info. To be even more destructive than that, let's take a look at our new post code. Our new post is doing a fetch to our new post, and it's using this form data, right? Well, we just made it so no one can get to this new post page unless they are signed in. But that's on the front end. What happens if some sneaky mofo opens up Postman and in Postman goes, hey, I happen to know that your backend has on localhost 3011 has an endpoint for new post. And what I can do is go to the body and send in some form data. And the form data we're going to send in is the title, the content, and the tagline. Now I'm not signed in. We know we're not signed in because I go to my front end. I don't have a sign out button, so I must not be signed in. I come over here and I hit my send button and I get a socket hangup, which was unexpected. Let me go look at my back end and see what's going on there. My back end is mad because we never handled our back end receiving a post without an image. So what we do is we say, we're going to throw in question mark, if there is a rec.file. Okay, ignore that. Pretend that that didn't happen. I hit the send button and I don't see anything going on here. In my back end, though, I can head over to Beekeeper and look at my blog, and my posts are showing what got sent in. Well, if I refresh my homepage, I can see that post that just happened there. We did a great job of authenticating our whole front end, but our back end is now wide open. We've got no way of saying, hey, only signed in users should be able to make a new post. We did that on the front end, but our back end's like, whatever, whenever a post request comes in, I'm just going to take that, save that information right into the database. So that is why it is important to not only have authentication on the front end, which we need regardless, because we need a sign-in page, a username, and password, and all of that. But we also need to validate on the back end that the user is signed in. Does anyone remember the technology that Clerk uses to validate whether or not the user is signed in? What do we send from the front end so that we know in the back end that the user is authenticated? The token, the JSON web token, the JWT. That is the code right here. So whenever we do a fetch, we're going to include this token. Where does this token come from? We use this function called getToken. Where does getToken come from? That comes from our getToken here, which comes from useAuth. Where does our useAuth come from? That comes from our clerk. So let's dive into that. I'm going to go back to my VS Code. I am going to say, hey, when we make a new post, I need to use auth. That use auth is going to give me access to get the token by using the auth. Then, before I make my new post call, I am going to const get my token by awaiting my get token. And once I have my token, I'm going to pass in the headers some authorization, which is going to include, and it's called a bearer token, right? I am bearing the token authentication authorization information I need, and I'm going to pass in the token that is coming from our get token, which is coming from our use auth, which is coming from our import from clerk. I'm gonna pause there. Does anyone have questions? You guys a minute to catch up. And we can use this format anytime that we make an API call. Plush.
Does clerk like keeps refreshing those tokens every time you load the app, or does it stay the same?
JWTs usually have an expiration with them. The libraries that are used to generate JWTs are usually pretty smart about expirations, though. So if it generates a token and then makes the API call, it will, next time that you ask for it to get a token, it will look at the last token that got generated and go, oh, this one isn't expired yet, so just reuse this. But if it is expired, I'm going to go back out to clerk, I'm going to go get a new token, and I'm going to send that back to you instead. I don't know if the clerk package generates a new token every single time, or if it waits until the last token was expired before it generates a new token. Not entirely sure on that, but chances are you can rely on get token to always give you a valid token. We just take that and pass that through to the backend. Great question. And we can actually see what's going on in this token. If we console log out the token here, I'm going to do it up here. No, I can't do it up there. We can actually take a look. If I go new post and I sign in, and I sign in, and I say A, B, C, and I inspect my console, and I hit create post, we can see this big block of text that comes out. That is what we need to validate on the backend. Do we have any questions before we leave the front end? We have a general idea of what we're doing, how we're passing this information around. Okay, I'm going to go over to my backend and I'm going to take a look at that code because I want an idea of how it works before I copy all of that information into my own backend. So I'm going to look at my server.js. We've got a new thing going on here with our const JWT require JSON web token. So I know I'm going to have to install my JSON web token. Then I need to make this validate user token middleware work. This is something that Ryan created custom that allows us to get the information out of the token. He did a lot of good validation though, right? He said, hey, if there is no header, then send back an error. And if there is a header, but they didn't send it in right, send back another error. Or if there is an authorization, but they didn't pass in the word bearer, go ahead and send back a different error. And if they get through all of that, then use this clerk public key.pem file. Tell React how to read that in, then use that information to verify the token. So that's what we have to set up over in ours. So I'm going to put his code off to the side. I'm going to, first of all, because we need JSON web token, I'm going to go to my terminal, Control C to stop, npm install JSON web token. I'm going to npm start before I forget to do that. And then once I get all of my middleware set up, I'm going to say const validate user token middleware. And we can actually call this anything, but I'm going to be consistent with what Ryan did. We do need a rec, a res, and a next. And because Ryan so eloquently handled all those different edge cases, I'm going to borrow everything that he is doing here up until the file, right? The only thing that we haven't seen before, we've seen rec.body, we've seen rec.params, we haven't seen rec.headers. rec.headers is just lining up with the headers that we're using in our front end right here. So these headers are showing up right here. Then we handle all these different edge cases, right? If the header is missing, if it's malformed, if it's missing the word bearer, or if the bearer is in there and there's just no token, handle all of those cases, send that back as a heads up. You're not allowed to get in if any of those things are missing. Now, the next thing we have to do is validate it. And in order to validate whatever token they're sending in, we need a key from clerk to understand, hey, is what they're sending in an actual valid token for my application? In order to do that, we need this private key file, basically to be able to decrypt that web token that's getting sent in. In order to get that, I'm going to head to my actually don't know where I get that. JWT templates. Anyone remember where we get that PEM file? Publishable secret. Oh, maybe.
If you go to advanced, I may be wrong. Right at the bottom.
Thank you.
And there.
There it is. Okay, thank you. This key is used to generate PEM public key. Perfect. Okay, that's what I was looking for. So I'm going to copy that. I'm going to make a new file. I'm going to call that the exact same thing that Ryan called it, so we're consistent, clerk public key.pem. So we're going to say clerk public key.pem. And I'm going to go ahead and paste everything in there. Again, that is so that we can validate that that JWT is who it is. That JWT includes the information that we're looking for, so we can decrypt it. So I'm going to take all of this and I'm going to say use the public key. Decode, save something called decoded, and then try to set decoded to the JWT. Where's JWT coming from? We need to import it. Import JWT from our JSON web token. Then in our decoded, use our JWT verify function to verify that the token that is getting passed in from our token, which is coming from, where's token coming from? Oh, right here. Token, which is coming from our header, matches the public key that clerk has provided to us, right? Think about this as being the lock and this being the key. If this key were the wrong key, then it wouldn't unlock this lock. So if anyone faked this token, well, we know this key is supposed to unlock this token. If it doesn't, then we know something's wrong. So if we get the decoded information, go ahead and console log it out. But if there is an error with it, then catch that error and console log out that there was an error. And also send back to the front end a 401, which is unauthorized, and give them the error text. And return, because we don't want it to go through the successful steps. However, if we don't hit this catch, and if that return doesn't stop everything, take the decoded information and stick it back in the request with a clerk user ID coming from the decoded information. And if it was successful, go ahead and call the next piece of the middleware stack. It's a lot of code. Good news is all of this is boilerplate. So you could reuse this. You could take this whole function, copy it, paste it right into your backend. Totally fine to use it. Does anyone have questions about how this is working so far? We haven't actually tested it. We actually haven't gotten it to work yet, but do we have any questions on it?
Yeah, can you explain line 63 again? I know you just went over it, but can you explain that again?
Yeah. So this, you see these returns in here. Whenever we hit a return, it stops the execution of a function and won't run anything underneath it. So what we basically do is we say, if there is not a header, send back something and then return. Don't let anything else happen after this. Otherwise, if there are not two parts to the header, if they put in the word bearer, but didn't actually put in the whole token after it, send back, hey, you still screwed up the header, return back, don't run anything after it. We go through each one of these use cases until we get all the way down to the public key. We verify it, and again, if that verification doesn't happen, send back information, return, stop anything else from running. But if it did work, this whole catch is going to get ignored. So we take the decoded information from verifying the token up here, and we put it in this object called clerk user ID, and we add that into our request.auth. We haven't used that information yet, but basically what we're doing is taking the information that was decoded from the JWT and storing it in our request so that we can access that information later on after this middleware is done running. So what we were basically able to do is in our new post, instead of saying, hey, anyone can send in a new post, we're going to say, you need to verify the user token through the middleware. Then, if they get through this verify user token middleware, and this next function is called in that middleware, we will move on to the next function to run, which is all of this stuff. And if all of that works, we should be able to console.log our rec.auth.clerk user ID. So it's very common in a middleware, once you get through all of that data, to then add additional information into the request. In fact, we've seen that before. We get access to the rec.body. Where does the rec.body come from? It's actually coming from our express JSON. So our express JSON middleware, this is a global middleware, but it is adding in the body so that we can get access to it. The same thing goes here. We're adding in this custom thing called auth. Then we are able to get access to that rec.auth because that middleware is running before our function runs right here. All right, let's put it all together. I'm going to save this. My app is crashing because I probably can't spell. Just validate, not verify. Okay, everything's running here. Before we are good developers and go test in our front end, I'm going to put on my hacker hat and I'm going to go try what we did before. I'm going to head back over to Postman and I'm going to say hacker 222 so we can differentiate. And I hit the send button and look what I get back. Error, authorization header not specified. Okay, that's cool because if I go to my beekeeper and refresh, my original hacker post is in here, but not my hacker 222 you've been hacked vulnerability 222. Okay, all of that's cool. So let's go do it the right way. I go to my React app. I'm going to go to my homepage. I have my sign out button, so I know I'm signed in. I can go to my new post, and I can say post from signed in user, some awesome content, and set up my tagline. And when I hit create post, I get a 500. And that 500 is coming from FS is not defined. FS stands for file system. We use our file system to read from the public key right here. But whenever we use our file system, which is built into Node, we also have to import FS from FS. FS is one of the few packages that are built into Node, so we don't need to npm install them. If we did npm install it, it wouldn't cause any issues. But because FS is built in, we don't actually have to install that. Okay, so let me try that again. I'm going to save. I'm going to make sure my server is online. It is. I'm going to clear my front end console. I'm going to hit create post. And now we got some interesting information coming back. I console.logged this decoded here. All of this information was hanging out in that JWT. This huge block of text was just a encryption to contain all of this clerk information. And this sub right here happens to be the user ID that is unique to clerk. So we are able to validate all of that information. The only problem is, oh, I just have to send something back. I have to send an empty object back because the front end is expecting that. So I hit the create post button. That takes me back to my home page, and my post got created. So with that said, we have completed a full authentication flow from this setup. How are we feeling about that? That a good review? Did Ryan cover anything that I didn't cover that you have questions about? Corin, if you think this is bad, you should try building an authentication system from scratch. Which is what we taught last cohort. Doug, do you have any thoughts on this, seeing how both of them are built?
I'll be honest, I'm gonna watch Ryan's video and your video. This seems a lot, it seems much more straightforward, being able to use the clerk.
Yep.
But there is a learning curve to it. But it seems like once you get that.
Yes. So the way we taught it last cohort is you had to make a login page from scratch. You had to make your sign up page from scratch. You had to learn how to encrypt the password, which is a whole other thing. Then you have to learn how to compare and make sure that the password that you have encrypted in your database lines up with the information that gets sent in. And then you have to use the headers and a authentication include in your front end to make sure the cookie information where we store that authorization got sent through every time. So it is there are pros and cons to using something like Clerk or setting up your own authentication system. I'm sure Ryan touched briefly on OAuth. OAuth is basically a way to make your sign in with Google or sign in with Apple or sign in with some other third-party service work. That is a very common flow. However, that, much like setting up your own custom system, can be quite complicated to understand. But lots of different ways of building a login system. This just helps you start to realize all of the intricacies of all of that. You do not have to pay for sign in with Apple I don't know of any that make you pay for sign in, like sign in with Google is free. There may be limits to say you can only sign in like X number of users a day. But that limit tends to be in like the millions. It's not anything that you need to worry about hitting. So all of those are free to use. Kind of interesting, the sign in with Apple is now a requirement on all iOS apps. If you are allowing a user to sign in, you also have to give the user the option to sign in with Apple instead of forcing them to create a user account in your own system. So that's kind of an interesting requirement that Apple added last year, which was a couple years after they rolled out sign in with Apple. And I will say sign in with Apple is easier to do in native applications, like iOS applications written in Swift, than it is to do in a web application, but they do support sign in with Apple. And I believe, I don't know if Clerk may have that as, yep, they do. Clerk has that as an option. So you can just turn that on and it should theoretically just work out of the box, but just depends on which ones you want to get set up. Okay, Quota, can you remind me of what your question was earlier, and I can determine whether we should do it before or after break?
It was about
Oh, multiple search, right? Let's do that after the break, and then when we come back from break, we will review that, which will be a good review of search for everyone. And once we're done with that, we can come back to this and start looking at hey, if this user is an admin user, can they create a post, and start getting some additional information there flowing. So more to come after the break. We'll go on break a little bit early. Be back at 7:15. We'll take a look at Shaquota's search, and then we'll come back to the blog project and go from there. Sound good? If you have any ideas about authentication now that we've got it set up and want to see how a feature works, feel free to think about them over break. And when you come back, throw them in the chat or let me know. Be back from break 7:15, and I will see you guys soon. Let's dive back in. Shaquota, do you want to share your screen and we can start with your search question?
Yeah.
So while you're pulling that up, Shaquota has made some awesome progress. They are over the requirements line, right? So what they have is something in their backend, in their database. The user can type something in the front end. It goes through a fetch call, gets to the backend. The backend does some filter, does something with it, sends it back to the front end. The front end displays those results, and everything is up and running. So I am going to request remote. And then if we go on your find a therapist page, what Shaquota has set up is that you can hit the search button and it will show from her own database all of these different therapists. And then if you go up to the top and just do a search for panic, and we hit search on that, we will see the therapists who specialize in who have panic disorders listed as one of their specialties. So what Shaquota's question was how do we make it so instead of this being an open text box, we instead have something where they can check off, oh, I'm looking for someone who helps with panic disorders and phobias. And when we hit the search button on that, it would use that information to display it. Well, we're going to have to change a couple things here. Before I dive into that, though, I want to show how it's working now, just so that everyone has an idea in case they are looking to get a search working. So in the front end, we have a component that is its own page that has a form with a input right here. And the input type is text, and we link it to the specialty in the state. From the specialty, we link into the state specialty right here, and then we make it so that when the form is submitted, it does this API call called search database. Search database goes into the database search API URL endpoint, and it also passes in the search input of whatever got typed in into the body, which we call query. So then we go over to the backend, and Shaquota is not using SQLite. She is only using PG, which is okay. If you don't want to use SQLite for your capstone, I would recommend it, but I'm not requiring it. So what Shaquota is doing is using PG directly, taking in the query that we are passing in from the body right here, and we are using that query to build out a SQL statement. So we're saying select all the columns from the therapist table where the specialty name, whoa, where did specialty name come from? That is the name of the column in her database. So we can see the whole database here, and specialty name is listed out right here. So we take whatever the query is from the front end, and we do this weird syntax. We say I like. I stands for insensitive, case insensitive. So basically, if someone types in career and they type in a lowercase c, we don't care if it's an uppercase c or a lowercase c. We want it to match no matter what. So that's why we say I like here, I for insensitive, where it's like, it doesn't need to be exactly that thing, just some part of it needs to line up with what is that part of the column. So we put in this % on either side to say any text can come before this, any text can come after this, but we're looking for this specific part to be part of the specialty column, as long as but it doesn't matter if it's uppercase or lowercase. Then we run that query and take the results of that query and send back the rows. That goes back to the front end. The front end gets those results, parses out the JSON, and sets it into the state of therapists. Then finally, the therapists get looped over down here. We set up a table, and we set up the header to include all of this information. And then in the body, we are able to go through and map over each one of the therapists. Each one of the therapists gets their own row, and then all of the data about the therapist shows up in the HTML. Before we dive into making that work with checkboxes, does anyone have questions about Shaquota's code? Because this is a really good example of making data in our database show up in the front end in a table interface.
Is there a reason? Because I noticed on some of the syntax you got T body, T head, TR. Like, what's the specific for that?
This is just HTML, so this isn't anything React specific. In order to get this to work, what we are actually pulling in is the React documentation. So I'm sorry, the Bootstrap documentation. So if you go to Bootstrap and do a search for table, in their overview, they will show you what this little table looks like, and then they'll show you table, T head, TR, T body. The T head stands for the table head, so everything shows up in bold. The TR is table row. We use table row here and here. The TH is table head, And then the TD stands for table data. So TH is just basically bold. TD is for every column cell, and then TR is for every row going down.
Okay, that makes. I kind of figured it had something to do with the table, but I just wanted to confirm.
Yep, great question.
I got a quick question.
Yeah.
So is the table data, is that pulling the information in from Beekeeper, or was that
Yes.
information? Okay.
So if you look in Beekeeper, this is what it looks like in here. And then you'll notice in Beekeeper, all of these fields are set up. So what we basically do is flow it from Beekeeper into our select statement. Our select statement we send into the results from the query. We pull the rows out of the results and send it back into the therapists. Then we go back to our front end. Our front end parses out the JSON right here, gets the same therapists here that we're sending back right here, takes that data and sets it into state. The state then saves it into therapists. Because we are updating the state, therapists now realize is down here that there is now new data to map over. It loops over each therapist to give us each individual therapist. And then you'll notice all of these form fields, all of these dots are lining up exactly with the information that's over in our Beekeeper.
Thank you. I see it. Yep, I see it now.
So lots of little steps, but it does kind of trickle down all the way from our first fetch to the back end to the database results back to the back end to our fetch to our state to our map. Any other questions? Thank you, Shaquota, for letting us use you as an example before we invest more into the search. Okay, let's talk about how we're going to get the search to work. So instead of making it be a open input, which is what we're doing here, I'm going to comment this out, and we're going to just test with a couple checkboxes. So we're going to say input type equals checkbox, and we are going to actually make that a self-closing tag. And we are going just to pick 3 specialties. So trauma, PTSD, and anxiety. That sounds like a good list to use. All traits of a good developer. Sorry, kidding. I shouldn't joke about therapy. Okay, so I'm gonna say trauma. And this, why do you keep lowercasing it? This isn't going to be the most beautiful interface, but hopefully it will be a good starting point. We'll say input type checkbox PTSD and put in a line break, and then input type checkbox anxiety, and then we need to be able to pull those values out. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to do a name on each of them so that we know whether or not the values are checked. And then I don't know how that data is actually going to show up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to comment all of this out for now. We're definitely going to still use it, but I'm going to console log out the event target element. And that should hypothetically give me, if I pick 2 of these and hit search and then look in the console, we get each one of these inputs. So I can say move this over so I can find it again. I can say something like const anxiety checked equals event target element anxiety checked. And we're going to do that a couple times. Now, keep in mind that we might want to go back and refactor this code at some point to make it more efficient. But to get it started, this is probably a decent starting point. So we say PTSD and trauma. And then let's console log out whether or not trauma is checked to see if that works. So I hit search, I go back to the console. Oh, back to the console, come back. And I look in my console here, and we get true, which is good. And then we uncheck trauma and hit search, and we get checked false. So we know we've got the right data coming out of the form, which is good. And so now we're going to bring our API call back in, and we are going to say also pass along whether or not anxiety was checked, whether PTSD was checked, and whether trauma was checked. And we can comment out our query now because we don't have our search input showing up anymore. We can always bring that back if we want to. And then what we are going to do is say in our backend, and we're going to get a little fancy here. We're going to say for every item, for const item of our, I'm changing my mind. I'm going to say the front end. Let's just name it this. And then we're going to say loop through the key value of the object dot entries of our rec dot body. So this is a little trick to say, hey, get the key out, store it in here, the value out and store it in here. And if the value equals true, that means they checked that off. So add the keys to search for, or we could call that specialties to search for, but I'm probably going to spell specialty wrong, so I'm not going to even attempt that. If the value is true, that means they checked it off. Then add the keys to search for, push in whatever the specialty is that they checked off. Then what we want to do is say where the specialty name, instead of the query, we're going to say I'm trying to get clever with a join, and I don't know if I can. It would be a lot easier if I had sequelize. Let me think about this. I need to generate basically out this string, and I really want to say where I like the %, the template literal, the keys to search for, and I'm going to say 0. And then we want to do an OR. And then we're going to do the I like again. So if I try and join it with an OR, let's do it like this. The keys to search for, we're going to do as our template literal right here. And the key we're going to search for is whatever the key actually is. And then we are going to, in here, join our keys to search for together with the word or in between them. Oh God, that was very hacky. I have no idea if this is going to work. So we are going to go back here and take these out. Who's it brutal against, Natasha? Brutal against myself for doubting whether it will work? Trauma checked 15. I can take that log out. Okay. So now we are going to uncheck everything and search, and that's going to probably break everything. Reboot. Okay. So search for anyone who does trauma. Okay, trauma and trauma. That's cool. And then let's find anyone who does trauma and anxiety and search, and it breaks everything. Near. Oh, I forgot a quote here. Try that again. Refresh. Anxiety and trauma. Search. Nope, it's still mad. Let's take this quote out. Amberlyn, we could do it with an and if we were looking for people who had trauma and anxiety as specialties. But Shaquota wanted it so that any counselor came back with either of those things. So an and we could definitely make that work. It's just mad at me because you mean I like doesn't exist? Oh, do I need to break this down to? Now you guys know why I'm so crazy when I get to class. It's because I do this for 8 hours and then come in and try and teach it to you guys. Search. Come on. Near specialty need. Okay, let's do this. Let's console log out our query so we can see what it's generating, and that may make it clear to us as to why it's not working. So close search, come over here, go find our query, and our query is saying select star from therapist where specialty name. Aha. So we need to take out this one. And then I like anxiety or specialty I name. Okay. On the right track, I think. So we save, we come over, we search. Aha. Okay. Trauma and anxiety and trauma. So it appears to be working. So let's break down how we did all of this. So first things first, in our front end, we changed our interface to be checkboxes instead. And for those checkboxes, we put the name of the value that we're searching for in the database. Then we said in our front end, go through those anxiety, PTSD, and trauma and put in whether or not they are checked off. Then take those variables and send them into our body of our backend request. Then, once we get them in the backend, go through each one of those things in the body, and if they are checked off, then take whatever the key is of what was checked off. That's going to be our anxiety, PTSD, or trauma, and add them to the list where we're looking for the specialty name where it is like whatever the thing is that got checked off. The thing is that they could check off multiple values. So what we do is we do our select from where, but then we take each one of these that was checked off and we join them with the word or in between them. So what ends up getting generated is this query right here, where we checked off anxiety and trauma. That's what our JavaScript generated out. And then we send those results back to the front end. Doug, what are your thoughts?
I like sequelize. Yeah, you writing out the SQL, that is a skill unto itself.
Knowing that we see, oh, sorry, didn't mean to open that. When we see the outputted SQL right here, that kind of helps us back into understanding how this code is working. But we're basically saying every time that we find a checked off value, add this to the array of all the values that we're keeping track of. But now we've got to turn that into SQL that will execute. So what I like to do is kind of work backwards from here and go, okay, what do I need to repeat? And how are we joining each one of those items together to generate out the SQL string that we need to actually execute that? Shaquota, was that what one, is that the feature that you had envisioned? And two, do you understand it?
Yes, that's what I wanted. I think I'm a little confused. Just let me see. The four.
Yep. So let's break that down. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to console log out our rec.body so we can see what's getting sent in there. So we're gonna leave that in. Okay. So now when I come up here and I uncheck anxiety and I hit search, we can see what our body looks like down here. Anxiety is false, PTSD is false, trauma is true. Well, that makes sense, right? Trauma was the only one that got checked. But what we want to do is we want to use these keys to be part of our SQL query. So we take this, we say loop over each one of these items in the body. Separate out the key, so anxiety is going to be in key and false is going to be in the value. And if the value is true, then we need to do something with it. But if it's false, we're not looking for a PTSD counselor or an anxiety counselor, so we don't need them to be part of the query. So go through them and find where the value is true. Find out where you checked it off. If they did check it off, then what are we trying to do with that in our query? We're trying to find where our specialties like whatever the thing is that they checked off. The thing is that they could check off multiple things. So what we do is every time we find a true value, we take whatever the key is, whatever they checked off, here, and we put that in an array of all of those items. That array looks like just this specialty name part down here. The thing is, if they pick multiple specialties, we want to join all of those specialties together with the word or in between it. So if we check off trauma and anxiety, we say, hey, we're sending in anxiety true, PTSD false, trauma true. Loop through each one of those to give me each individual key. Check to see if the key is true. And if it is true, generate out this part of the query, the specialty name here. And because there are two of them that are true, we're going to join those keys together with the word or in between them.
Okay. I understand now.
That is not entry level JavaScript, which, Natasha, to go back to your point of being brutal, this is not easy code to write. We are thinking about it as, well, we've got this data with the key and the value, and somehow I need to translate that into some SQL that's going to write, right? That's going to go execute and go do my filters properly. So we break that down into a couple steps. We say loop over all of the data that's coming in, only pay attention to the values that are true. If the value is true, here's the part of the SQL that I want to generate out that includes that key, and then go join all of that together and run that in the SQL query. Is anyone still lost?
So what is the I like doing again? Like, why was it causing that error when it was on line 24?
Yeah, so the I like is saying, hey, wherever we find, because if you look at the data, you'll see that it's all one giant text field, right? So what the I like is doing is it's basically saying, hey, where any part of the text field includes this snippet of text that we're looking for. Because this is not broken out into multiple rows or multiple columns, what we're doing is we're saying, hey, go find where the specialty name basically includes. You can think of the I like as a includes operator. Does that help?
Yes. So if a person wants to check off the box, then now she would have to go back and list out in the front end each individual specialty.
Correct.
There's not a way to like include them in one value for the for them to be able, like, so that it doesn't have to be added individually line by line for it to pull it from
So
BQ.
you're asking a very good question. The response that I have to that is my boss has finally learned to stop asking me, can I? Because the answer will always be yes. The real question is, how long will, which is really what you're asking of, how long will it take me to figure out to build whatever you're asking me to build? So
Okay, that's right. I didn't know if I wanted the question to be clear, but I didn't know if I was asking the right thing.
you were asking the right question. What we could do, and Shikoto, I'm sorry, I'm hijacking your code here, is we could do something where we say, hey, go get me we can say something like const get specialties is an async function. We are going to get the specialties when the server boots up. We are going to go select the specialty name. No, gotta put this in a query. Const query equals our db.query, which is going to go in a template literal. And it's going to select the specialty name from the therapist table. Then we are going to await that query running, and we are going to loop over for each therapist in the database, go over each one of the query rows that came back. Then we are going to say the specialties are split with a comma and a space in between them. So what we are going to do is say our const specialty array is going to get generated by going to the therapist, going to the specialty name, and splitting it out with a comma and a space between them. So let's see what that looks like. I'm going to console log out the specialty name to start. And then I'm going to log out our specialty array.
And your function needs an arrow.
Thank you. See if that was my only bug. Okay, so now what's happening here? If we go all the way up to the top, or towards the top, you can see my specialties coming from the database right here, right? When we console log them out, they're just one giant string. And to prove that, I can actually throw the word type of here, and that is going to show me, hey, everything in the database is a string. Well, now we want to keep track of them individually. We want to say, hey, there's a comma between each one of these. Give me the list of all of the specialties. That is that split that's happening right here and is giving us all of the specialties right here. Well, we could do something like, say, const all specialties is an array. And every time that we get this specialty array, go to the all specialties and push in all of the specialties of this particular counselor. And then once we're done looping over all the counselors, console log out all the specialties. Well, now that appears to have worked, because if we start at the top of the list, we see all these different specialties, but you'll notice there are some duplicates. We see grief, we see grief and loss, we see grief and loss again. Well, what's happening is we went through and we got each individual specialty out of the database, but of course, counselors are going to specialize, have to share specialties, right? Trauma is going to be a duplicate, anxiety is a duplicate. We need to deduplicate that array for all of the specialties. We can do that with something called a set. And so in order to do that, we say, hey, make a new set out of all of the specialties. A set is basically a deduplicated array in JavaScript. And now that we have done that, when we save and scroll down to after our reboot, we will get a list of all the specialties in the database without them being duplicated. So hypothetically, what we could do from here is, because we now have all those specialties, we could say something like const deduped is equal to that set. And then we want to map over the specialty. And we would like to return a template literal, which has an input type of checkbox and a type, name of the specialty, and then close out the input, put the specialty name next to it as a label, and also add in a line break. And then we are going to console log all of the deduped items and join them together with a line break. And I will remove that from here. And the output that we get, it's going to seem like black magic to everyone, is all of these inputs here. So we could actually take those. I'm going to do a new line between them so we can read them a little easier. And you can see that code generates out all of our checkboxes that we could now copy and paste into our front end, and it should work. And Shaquota, if all of that scares the crap out of you, you can just comment out that one line of code and it won't generate them every time. Tara, was that along the lines of what you were asking to get done?
Yes.
If we had those fields separated out in the database as separate columns, or we had separate rows for all of those specialties, it would be much easier to do what you were accomplishing. But because we had to break it out and split out all the specialties, then generate the HTML for it, that is along the lines of how you would do something like that. It isn't quite getting it into the front end, but it is giving you something that is easier to copy and paste based off of all the specialties that are in the database.
Could you make the get specialties an endpoint or run by an endpoint that returns the list, and then in the front end have it generate the checkboxes?
Damn it, Doug, I was afraid you were going to ask that. Yeah, what we could do, sorry,
So if
Shaquota,
you added a new counselor or a new therapist that had a new specialty,
it would automatically update. Yeah, what we could do, I'm gonna say server.get specialties. I'm not even gonna attempt to spell it right. Rec res get the specialties, deduplicate them, and then res.send the specialties, all the deduped ones. Then on our front end, when the page loads, do a use effect that makes an API call that is async, that makes the API call, that gets our response from awaiting a fetch to our API URL, that is going to the specialty endpoint, and then we're going to get the data from awaiting the response.json. And then we are going to set our specialty list to our data.specialties. We need to store that in state because whenever we have data coming from a database or a third-party source that gets updated, we want to store it in state. We're going to set our spec list to a use state that starts as an empty array. And then when we go do all of the inputs down here, we can actually comment out the hard-coded ones and say loop over the specialty list to get each specialty. And that is going to return an input type checkbox with the value of whatever the specialty is and a key of the specialty. And we also need to return two other things with it. Actually, we can just return it in a div, and then put in the specialty to the right of it as a label. And don't use a $sign because we're in React and I can't keep my React and JavaScript separate. And just like that, we are using the list of everything in the database. And then what's cool is that if we go back to Beekeeper and we say we also support engineers and I hit apply and come back and refresh in our front end, we will see that engineers get their own type of counseling. My brain hurts. Let me just do a quick run through of how we did that. So we make a new endpoint to get all of our specialties. We make an empty array to hold all the specialties. We go to the database and get all of the specialties in from the database. We loop over each one of the therapists in the database, but we run into the problem that the specialties are all stored as one big string with commas in between them. So what we do is we split out that string wherever there is a comma and a space, take that item and store it as one big array with each item in the array broken down by where there is a comma and a space. Take all of those specialties that this particular counselor has and push them into the array of all the specialties across all the counselors. Once we get all the specialties of all the counselors together, deduplicate them using this thing called a set, because certain counselors will have the same specialties shared between them. Then send that entire thing back to the front end. When it gets to the front end, make the request to get the specialties right here, parse the JSON, take the specialties, set it into state. The state gets updated by the spec list. The spec list comes down and we map over each one of them. What do we want to show up for each spec? We want an input with the type of checkbox, the value of whatever specialty they gave us, and then the name of the spec right here, which means that if we come over here and we pick two different things and hit the search button, son of a bitch. Oh, we would have to update our search database to work with that. Do I really want to do that? Oh, fine. Nope, don't want to do it that way. Um, uh, checked values element name is going to equal whether the element is checked. And then throw the checked values in here. Join query broke element Restart, refresh. Pick 2 of these. Inspect. Clear. Search. Okay, it's looping over all of the inputs, which is what I told it to do. And when I'm getting the element, $21, $21, fake out. That's not what I'm looking for. What I'm looking for is right underneath it. Blank, undefined. Fantastic. Element, event, target element. Oh, is this going to be some stupid?
I did notice that one of the checkboxes had no name next to it, which means I don't know if it was a blank space or an empty. Would that be causing any issue? Like when it did the split, there must have been a comma without something in between.
There's some weird thing with event target elements isn't actually an array, it's an HTML collection, so looping over it is weird. But I don't know if that's what's causing the problem. If I log out the element, maybe that will help me understand why it's not working. Search, back to my console. So it is looping over all of the inputs. Oh, they have a value, not a name. That's what I did wrong. Back to the front end. These should be a name, not a value, because the value is checked or not checked. The name is what we're using to get it out of that. Name. And restart the back end because that crashed. Come back over to the front end. Close. Search. Go back to our console. Look in our console. Oh, do I have to refresh? No, I shouldn't have to refresh the page. Is this old? Is there more down at the bottom? Come on, why did my mouse just stop? That's weird. There we go. Okay, so now that's working. But it's still not generating out the object correctly. So let me go back to the front end. It is looping over each of event target elements, oh, I commented this out. Okay. Restart. Clear. Search. Aha. Okay, so we got school-related stress. And engineers, if you have anything else checked. Oh, and grief and ADHD. So let's just search for the engineers because we just added that to one counselor. And we just get that one counselor. And then if we add in school-related stress on top of that, we get another counselor with school-related stress.
Easy peasy. Sorry, I opened that can of worms.
I knew it was going to be a can of worms, which is why I was hesitant to go through the full flow of it. Shaquota, is any of that helpful to you, or are you just like, screw all of this? I didn't realize there were that many specialties.
Yeah.
This is a good example of full stack when you go full stack and then put a stack on top of it. This is like full circle, right? And where we start to see when we've got real world user data in the database, where the user may type something in and we don't realize that they spelled trauma wrong. And so now we get two different kinds of trauma, right? There's all kinds of ways to make the data flow. And it is important to say, hey, to get started, do I want to limit this to the only this list of specialties, or you start thinking like Doug of, oh, well, if they're all in the database, there's got to be some way to dynamically generate them. There is, it just takes a lot of code and a lot of debugging. Corwin definitely could change that into a drop-down list. And now you are realizing the plight of a developer of, you get started and you think there are only a couple of them and you design it all as a checkbox. And then you come into work the next day and your boss has created 400 different specialties and the interface looks terrible. And you have to go back and refactor all of that code to be a multi-select dropdown instead of checkboxes. And so that is certainly something that happens where you got to go back through and refactor and change that interface out. You could do a scrolling list off to the side, and Shaquota, I promise this is the last thing I will do to your code. What we can do is in the front end, because this input is all part of this return right here, we can put it all in one div and put a style on this of max height, like 200 pixels. And then that obviously looks terrible. So we're going to overflow our X to auto. And that will put in a little scroll bar that we can scroll up and down on.
That's good.
And we could even do something. I lied. I said that was the last thing I was going to do. I'm going to make it look even better. Class name of a row on this. And then this is going to get a class name of a col3. And shabam. Nope, col3 isn't big enough. Col4. And just like that, we now have columns and can scroll through them to see all of them.
So quick question.
Yes.
I just seen that. I noticed when Doug pointed out the space. So I have to go through my whole thing to figure out where I put an extra space.
Yep. I could write more code to do it. I'm hoping that this is the only one because that jumped out to me. Any other ones with a comma at the end of it would cause that issue. The other thing we can do is if I refresh. Oh, did I fix it? Oh, I fixed it. Oh, and I should probably take out engineers too, because other people are going to be like, what the hell is engineering specialty? All right, you're good to go.
Thank you.
That exercise is the reason that engineers need therapy.
Thank you for volunteering, Shaquota. I'm hoping more people will volunteer and not be scared by me hijacking your code. but hopefully did someone else get some value out of seeing that exercise and seeing the steps that it takes? Not necessarily, oh, I'm going to go take that code and use it directly, but hopefully you kind of see the mindset. And I will say, I think Tara posted, I know you're trying to figure it out, but can you kind of talk through it? That is something that is very, very hard to do as a senior engineer, and something that you should definitely press. If you have a senior engineer who is mentoring you, press them to talk through it. I wish I had saw that in the chat. Next time that happens, Tara, come off mute and just be like when you interrupt and go, you're not sharing your screen, interrupt and be like, you're not sharing your innermost thoughts of how you're thinking through this, because that is what's helpful to you guys, right? And so kind of thinking through those steps, sometimes we do those steps and we're so ingrained in what the computer is doing that we forget to talk through what is happening. And that is a very important thing to do in a technical interview as well. When you are interviewing and someone's watching you code, all you're feeling as the person who's getting interviewed is them breathing down your neck and them evaluating every little thing that you're doing wrong. But there's a human element to that as well, where if you talk through it and you go, well, I'm trying to split this string, and I know that all of the values are in this one big string, but they aren't showing up the way that I want them to. What you may get is that interviewer, if you get a terrible interviewer, they're going to say sucks to suck and figure it out on your own. But if you get a good interviewer, they're going to take a little pity on you and they're going to go, well, have you tried doing this? Or did you think about splitting it in a different way? Or did you think about deduplicating that after you've done that, right? They're going to give you a little hint. But if you're stone cold and just blasting through it at 1,000,000 miles an hour, they're gonna be like, whatever, right? Like, they went off the rails 15 minutes ago, but they're not letting me in on their thought process, so why would I try and help them? But if you talk through that process as you're going through it, now all of a sudden it becomes much easier for them to engage and help you get back on track if you get off it. So definitely, if you are getting some kind of senior mentoring session or some kind of interview session, definitely ask questions, definitely talk through your thought process, because then you'll get either more out of the session or get help when you start to go off the rails and you need a little help to get back on it. If you liked that session, oddly enough, the Twitch streaming platform, there is a niche now of watching other people code. For whatever reason, Twitch found out and then Amazon bought them. People like to watch other people play video games, even though they're not playing the video game themselves. Some very smart person, I don't know who it is, or if you could even find whoever the first person was to do it, was like, hey, what if I just coded? And as I was coding, I just kind of talked through what I was working on. And other developers were like, yeah, that would be cool. I want to watch other people write code. And so Twitch now has a whole like subsection of people who are coding. If you go on Twitch and do a search for like React, Node, JavaScript, you would be surprised at how many results that you will get. And then people obviously also post that on YouTube of like tutorials and stuff that they have done. So if you enjoyed that session, you can go check out YouTube and see what's going on there. Or Twitch. Does
I'm happy
anyone...
you said that, because I felt a little weird, because I was like watching you and I was like, that's why I'm like, oh, talk us through. Because it was like one of those customer care moments where they like go dead silent and you're like, are you still there? And then you're like, yeah, I'm still here. But I thought I was like odd for like enjoying watching you just kind of go through it and flip through the screens. I don't know. But I also like to watch people paint and make cakes and other random stuff. So
my weird hobby is I follow a YouTuber called Girl with the Dogs, and she's a dog groomer. Why in God's name do I like watching 6-minute videos of a dog getting groomed? I can't tell you, but I do, and it's who I am, and I'm not ashamed of that. So everyone has a different thing and everyone learns differently. I can promise you there are at least 2 or 3 of you who are like, that was terrible. I can't believe he made us sit through that. That was the worst thing I ever saw. That's okay, right? Everyone learns differently. Everyone's gonna get oh, the area rugs. That's a good one too. Yeah, all the dirt when they squeegee it out.
It is. It's like
So
oddly
satisfying.
satisfying. I don't know why, but I'm like, I should take my area rug outside
I watch that all the
and
time.
try to and try to clean it.
I would love to see, like, you know, at the end of the day, the YouTube algorithm is going through and being like, okay, I know what kind of person this is. This is the kind of person who like writes JavaScript or likes history videos. And then it's going to be like, it's also a fan of dog grooming. And I would just love to know, like, get at the data that Google holds so near and dear to their hearts and know, like, what does Google think of the person that I am and the interests that I have? I would love if their API exposed that. And unfortunately, that's very proprietary information, and an algorithm that is probably worth millions of dollars because it's going through all the YouTube videos, all of the titles, all of the now transcription of the YouTube videos. So they now not only know the title of the video you watched or the creator, but also everything that was said inside that video, they're now doing speech to text on. So if they mention smart home in that video, and even though the title doesn't have anything about smart home or the description doesn't have anything about smart home, they know that smart home was talked about so that they can recommend that in follow-up videos for you. So kind of scary to think about, but anyway, that was a tangent.
You
But
don't
what's
Um,
Apple doing right now that I can think like, oh, I want to get married, and then all of a sudden I start seeing all these pop-ups, and I don't say it, I think it. What's Apple doing? Are they tapping into my thoughts? Because all of a sudden I see all these ads for engagement rings, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's cute.
Here's my take on that. I work with text to speech and speech to text at work all the time, right? Text to speech is, hey, we've got this thing typed in, but I would like it read aloud to me. Or in reverse of that, which is much more powerful, of the user said this thing, I've got this speech as this MP3 file, and I need to convert it to text. It is very expensive to do speech to text. It takes a lot of power, takes a lot of data on the internet, and it really takes a lot of battery power as well. So I do think that the number of companies that are listening to you, like quite literally listening to what you're talking about and using that against you, would be very, very expensive to be able to collect all of that data. What is not expensive to collect is, hey, you were on Google and you clicked on this link, right? I'm officiating a wedding on Friday and I was shopping for a suit, right? And I did a search for summer wedding suit. I now am bombarded. Google must think I am getting married because it is absolutely everywhere and I'm getting engagement rings and all of that stuff. So it is much more common to take an action of yours, whether that's something that you typed in, whether that's a link that you clicked on, whether that's an email newsletter that you're subscribed to, whether that's a YouTube video that you watch. All of that metadata is definitely out there. I do think that you're starting to borderline on paranoia in terms of, oh, these big companies are listening to us. Google's the only maybe exception to that. Maybe Amazon, but Apple themselves really pride themselves on privacy and not using your data against you. What I do recommend you do is go to the settings on your phone, whether that's an iPhone or an Android, and go to the privacy or the permission section and look at how many applications are using the microphone on your phone. Initially, you're like, well, why does Instagram need access to my microphone? Well, because if you're recording a video, you want that video to include the audio. That audio has to come from your microphone. That kind of makes sense. Then you start going through other ones and you're like, why does my Gmail have access to my microphone? There's a lot of applications out there. The iPhone and Google has kind of been forced to do this because the iPhone has gotten better at it. Enforces those permissions at the OS level. That means that if you turn off microphone access, there is nothing I can do as an app developer to get access to your microphone because you have turned it off. I can ask you to turn it back on and it will give you a little pop-up, but unless you actually give me permission in your system settings, I as a developer, I have no way of getting access to the microphone. So permissions are definitely something to think about on that. Rain, what code are you talking about finding?
You want me to wait until tomorrow?
Yeah, that's probably a good
I
idea.
like that.
Give us a preview though. What code? What are you talking about? What does
Okay,
it
I'm a
do?
little apprehensive, but whatever. Let's go.
Well, you can just give us a preview now, and we can actually dive into it tomorrow if you want.
Okay. So I just added this file last night. I stayed up till like 1 o'clock in the morning. I thought it would be cool if I could have, like, you know how Matrix have like the binary code?
Yep,
And
raining down.
okay, yeah, and it was animated. So I said, okay, I'm doing a meal prep app. Let's put in some emojis. But
Okay.
for the life of me, I cannot get this to conjugate or to be able to translate that type of font. Because, you know, usually like we'll do like, you know, value text or something like that. It's not text and it's not something that I've learned yet. So I've been playing around with it all night. Here's one version of what I've been doing. Here's something else that I found. Hold on 1 second. Yeah.
I am so glad Doug is TA tonight because, and I mean this week, because Doug has more experience with canvases than I do.
Hey, Doug.
Um,
I'm so stuck on this. Like, oh my God. So when I go into my actual project, it's raining freaking question marks. But when I click on the question marks, it'll say find apple, find eggplant emoji. You know what I mean? And even when I actually go to a recipe, what's this, 3,000 calories? It's still raining on my next page. I really just wanted it for the main page where I'm going to do my, oh, you want remote? Of course you want remote.
I think you're really close.
I'm very, I know it. I can feel it.
So you're mixing font size and font family here, which I think is a mistake. So I'm going to take this out.
Now, originally on line 7, that said, that was text. So originally I had it saying like apple, eggplant, because I wanted to say the same. But then I was like, you know, let's drop some bananas on them. You know what I mean?
So Doug, is there CTX is coming from Canvas get context 2D? Is there a CTX.set value or
Sorry, I was just reading a message. So there is what is it, fill text? So where is the line that's putting those emojis?
Line 7.
so if I just put in the letter A here.
Okay, oh no, she's got, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
It's already there on line 23. That's where
Oh, okay.
is in there.
Yeah.
And where's, so text is characters.
Okay, so let's just see if it's generating this outright. Let me refresh because I think I broke that. And then look in here.
So
Okay, so we've got question marks going on in there.
oh, that's going to go for infinity because I checked that last night. So mind you, I started off the same way and then I had got with a TA and then we changed it up a little bit. I just wanted to show you right quick. Okay, hold on 1 second. This is the secondary. just to see if it helps you. Hold on 1 second. AV. Okay, let's save that. Let's go ahead and run this. And see how you were going that route? Then we got to this. Okay, but let me actually let you take a look at it, at the difference.
Okay, so I like this approach more.
You like this one better? Okay, this is what the TA was helping me with.
Doug would probably like the canvas approach more though. So take that with a grain of salt.
Just
Well,
control D if you want the other route that
My
I
first-
started with.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, that's it. I apologize.
So my first question is, can you get an emoji to show up on the page just as text without trying to do any animation or anything?
Oh, okay, I like it. So let's go down to,
Because I've never used an emoji in React.
you should,
Can you, I was told you could do it, right? Or else I just spent a lot of
can
time.
you hit, option command space on your keyboard, Rain? For
Sure.
some weird reason, it doesn't, or is it control command space? Whatever pulls up the emoji.
Yeah, okay, yeah, I was doing command control space last night.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, perfect. Okay. So we're gonna just throw an apple in, and then I'm gonna disable this for now. Okay, so the apple does show up.
Oh my good, oh my goodness.
So you're
sorry, it's
on
got
the
happy.
right track. Characters. You are creating a div.
Mhm.
You're setting the, oh.
That's where the TA was getting stuck. We kept on saying it got to be something with the inner text. So you saying inner HTML?
Now, with React
Hmm.
for inner HTML, don't you have to do like dangerously set inner HTML, or is that for a different purpose?
Only if you're doing that in the return. If you're creating the element in the JavaScript, you don't. So this, I don't
Okay.
love this in React because it's bypassing the inner DOM, but that's a concern for another day.
So what if in there, rather than generating the random character, what if there you actually put in the apple emoji, the apple icon or banana or whatever, to see if that will show up for all of them in the animation? Like, instead of random character, what if you set it to one of the icons?
Let's try it. I'm learning that testing. That's where it's at. Oh my God, it's raining eggplant. I'm sorry. I am
Aubergine.
so happy right now. Like this was straining my brain yesterday.
Math.floor, math.random char.
So I should move line 12 from the split to line 22.
No, because that's not doing the randomization. So why isn't your let's try this. Let's make each one of these their own string. I don't think this is gonna fix it though.
You don't think I should stay with the colons?
Stay with the what?
With colons between them instead of commas?
No, I think it's gonna be better to keep them as separate strings.
Yeah, I believe. Oh my gosh. That's
Now,
really tough.
why didn't your
that.
split work? I have no idea.
Can you just change the drop to like 0.1 for me on line
Go ahead, go for it. You've got control.
Oh, no. That was with the original set of code I had. So the drop is not what's moving at the speed. So just forget it. I apologize. Because this is the updated code.
Where is, you got your number of items? I'm trying to figure
31
out
is move items.
move items. Yeah, but how is this looped? Like, how does that
Oh,
keep on
request
running?
animation frame, line 40.
Mhm,
Oh,
mhm.
yeah, request animation frames out of my comfort zone and into Doug's comfort zone. So is there a way to slow that down?
It should try to be doing it at 60 frames per second. You could change
I like
Uh,
it at a point two.
where it's doing style top. You could change that from 1 to 0.1, top plus 0.1.
That would definitely slow it down.
Yeah, point two. Definitely point two.
And then, I mean, I would make it so they falling at variable rates. Like you could,
Yeah,
They-
like I had originally when I was using drop. I like drop.
Oh,
on
you
the
could
previous
do
code I was showing you.
something like generate number between JS. Sorry, I'm gonna cheat and Stack Overflow some code.
I think the only problem of doing it in there was they're going to speed up and slow down. You would have an array. You'd have to have like a speed and an emoji.
So when we generate out the food items, we could associate the element data speed
Oh, that's a good idea.
Mhm.
with we'll just say this isn't going to give you control, but this should in theory work, and then use the element data set speed. By the way, if you would like to leave, you are more than welcome to leave. It is
Sorry,
overcast time. I've got nothing new for you. Now I'm just having fun. So, nope, I broke it. Just flat out broke it.
But what took me like 2-3 hours of brain straining, like you are making this work. It's amazing. It really is.
No, I should have left it as data set. Data set. That's going to be a number between 0. Am I properly getting that? Console log element data set. Yes, it's coming as a string, which might be causing an issue. So if we parse that and we can take that out. Variable rate drops. And then one last thing we can do, we can say generate number range JS and steal some code from Stack Overflow. Character, no, I don't want characters, I want numbers.
You could do like 0.5 plus math random times 0.5.
Yeah, or we could just copy this code and
Oh,
use
there
it.
you go.
I mean, we probably could, but I'm just gonna borrow this. And then we say get range, because I don't like the name of that, and we should give credit, so if anyone else looks at our code, they can know where this came from because we didn't write it. So I like to put Stack Overflow link right in. And then for the speed, we can say get range between 0.1 and 0.3. And refresh. And there you've got randomly falling at different rates.
You know, last night I was just starting off from like whole numbers like 1 and it aligned everything. So this is awesome.
If you wanted to get really fancy, you can make the faster ones a little bit bigger, the slower ones a little bit smaller, so it'll look like they're in space. The closer ones are falling faster.
Um,
And believe you me, this all started off as an animated binary code with a black background.
we could say const speed is equal to this. And then throw the speed back in here, and then times this by the speed times.
Oh,
Well, I'll just leave
that's
it.
it. That's its left, not
Oh,
its
thank you.
size.
Where's that text? Oh, we're doing it inner HTML, so we would font size it.
Yeah, I guess so.
Now, last night when I was doing a little research, it said that the name of the font for emojis is called Noto, N-O-T-O. Do I need to implement that anywhere in my code? Would that help?
No,
Okay.
it's using the default font family to render the emoji, and that should work.
Okay, then.
Do you need to put a PX in there, or does React know that the number is pixels?
We have broken out of the land of React because we're
Oh,
whenever
so-
we do element or document, we're right in the actual DOM. So maybe you are right. Oh, yep. Okay, so now you're maybe we want to play with that a little bit, but
I was gonna say,
now
if they're small, oh, that's a big eggplant, right? And mango. Wow.
okay, so now your smaller items are slower, and your bigger items are falling faster. I don't know if you like that effect, but it's in there.
It
To-
works.
To really make it work, you then have to work with the layering so that the bigger ones are on top of the smaller ones.
Okay, I give up. That's
Yeah,
This is good. You guys really helped me. Like this green strain.
thank you, Doug. I would not have been there without Doug's assist on this.
Now, do I have 60 seconds?
Sure.
Okay. So as you can see my code, like if everyone who like the TAs who have looked at this, they said, well, you know, it looks pretty much complete. And the API, like I said yesterday, it gives me a lot of information for the recipes. But how could I implement the back end so I can give you a full scope of my comprehension?
You will want to do so when you enter your calories, right, and say get plan, it's bringing all of this back. I'm going to fix that one thing because it's going to drive me
Yes.
nuts until I do. What file is that?
That's
meal list.
my meal list right there. Oh, I'm pointing at the screen like you can see. Oh my God.
I'm just gonna throw a style on here of color of background.
And one thing I've learned from doing this project is if you have the basic concepts, I can really build anything.
Uh-huh.
Like seriously, it's the same thing over and over again.
Where is your meal list component? Is that in page 1?
Page 1 is actually blank right now. So it's not on page 1.
Oh, page 1 is just empty. Where is
I'm not quite done yet. Great.
meal data, meal list? Oh, meal list is that parent component. Why is that not matrix background meal list? I'm just gonna do it on no, it's not in that section. Meal list. Wait, meal. Oh, that's just not linking me to the go here. go here. I want to do it. We got to do it yourself. I think this is where I want to be. There we go. So that way your background
Yeah,
isn't
that's-
coming through the text.
Awesome.
Okay, so what I would love to see by Thursday is
Aw.
the ability to say, instead of just go to recipe, you could click on the save recipe
Oh,
button,
all right.
and then you could click on my recipes kind of up here at the top of the page or anywhere on the page, doesn't matter. And when
Mhm.
you click on my recipes, it will show you the recipes that you have saved.
Can you click on go to recipe and tell me what you think?
That's fine to link to the external website. I still want another button to save the recipe and then a button to like view all of the saved recipes.
Okay, another button, some on clicks, a couple of changes, no problem.
A little fetch request on that save, send the ID or the link of the recipe to the database, then be able to pull that information back out of the database on your view saved recipes page, and you will be meeting all of the requirements.
Okay, we're still being recorded, right?
Yep.
Okay, good. All right. Cool. All right, by Thursday. Cool. Thank you.
And if you're on the way, you don't have it all done by Thursday, it's not like you're not going to graduate. It's not like Thursday's a drop dead date. Thursday's just the day that we
Feel
go.
like this.
Well, if you want to treat it like that, I'm not going to stop you. You're really close. We just need a little bit more of that full stack. We just need to layer in your own database, and then you'll be good to go. So you're on a really good track.
Thank you very much.
No problem. Any other questions for this evening before we call it?
Have a good
Awesome.
night.
Have a good night.
Night.